The last dregs of daylight slowly wash over the horizon as the sea becomes a black, choppy mass. In the dark of night, the only evidence it is still there is the rhythmic sound of the water crashing against the rocks below. The townsfolk have all amassed on top of the highest mound near their village. Most of the homes below have extinguished their lights, but a few people are still finding their way to the hill, and the glow of their torches foretell their arrival as they work their way up the path. Aidan and his family are standing in a large semicircle, skirting the edge of the mound. In its center is a towering blaze. It has taken several days to construct. Earlier, Aidan and some of the younger men in town had felled many trees and lugged them up the hill, creating the wooden structure. Aidan had made sure he was on the mound earlier than most, so that he could see his edifice set afire. He scans the crowd, a slight unease creeping up in his stomach. Has everyone arrived? He wonders. Normally the townspeople's faces would not make him so fearful, but tonight he does not see the familiar smiles of his friends and family. No, tonight they wear the images of ghosts and monsters. Framed by the dancing lights of the fire, their faces are enough to make the hairs stand on the back of his neck. Although Aidan was already 16 years of age, essentially already a man amongst his people, the macabre ritual still frightened him as much as when he had witnessed it as a child. Suddenly, they emerge from behind the crowd. The druids, wearing ceremonial robes along with ominous masks. Their heads are cloaked in shadow, under hoods made from the heads of cattle, lending a certain malevolent air to the scene. These mystics carry with them platters laden with turnips, rye, and corn, as they lead several goats and a cow behind them. The horrified creatures bleat and moan, as if they somehow know what is to come. The eldest of the priests now stands before the bonfire, so close that Aidan is astonished that the heat does not singe the man. The priest then turns to address the crowd, and, with his words, a sudden, unsettling silence ripples through the townsfolk. Soon, the priest commences to recite the liturgy in a loud, stern voice. His utterings consist of old words, ancient and forbidden, magical incantations. Few of those gathered on the mound understand any of it. However, the priest is not speaking to the nervous crowd, but to someone or something else. He raises his hands as he entreats those who would hear him to consider that which he beseeches. As he completes the first of the many prayers that will echo through the soft autumn breeze on this night, the vegetables and grain are thrown into the fire, which readily laps them up, causing a ruckus amongst the once steady flames. The old druid now gives a nod to his disciples. Without flinching, they each brandish ceremonial blades and slice the throat of the animal they towed up the hill. The cries of these beasts are short and weak, for they are old, decrepit, and quickly succumb to their wounds. As soon as the animals collapse, as their legs give way from under them, the druids and several of the men in the crowd grab the carcasses, which join the other offerings on the roaring fire. The druids continue chanting as the smell of the animal fat strikes Aidan's nose. It is simultaneously entrancing and sickening, while the monotonous crooning of the clerics undulates over the mound, much like the pounding surf below. Aidan finds himself staring off into the night. It is the eve of Samhain, a holy and momentous time. Will the gods accept their sacrifice? Will they hear their call and shelter them for the winter to come? Or will they find them wanting, unworthy, and lead them to certain death? Samhain, the dark origins of Halloween, a bite-sized fright. This series contains disturbing content. Listener discretion is advised. With the rituals ended and the frenzy of the evening now subsided, Aidan and his family make their way down the mound toward the sprawling town below. Their farm is located on the outskirts, so they have a longer walk home than most, a trip which takes them through dark, gloomy woods. His father and mother lead the group, carrying with them a large torch. Its light is strong, for it was lit from the bonfire on the mound. Aidan twists to see that the inferno still burns brightly on the hilltop, a beacon in the night. Turning back, he notices the children's eyes darting to and fro nervously. "Keep your eyes ahead, on the road," Aidan calls to the younger children. "You know these forests as well as our fields." The younglings simply give him grave looks. Aidan hasn't been able to shake a vague sense of dread since the festival began, and he tries his best to mask the creeping fear inside him as they make their way home. "Besides," Aidan gulps, ignoring the pleading of the young ones, "we have these." He taps one of the lanterns in his brother's hands. Each of the children carries a large turnip, still lit by virtue of the animal fat contained inside. They soon reach their home, a hovel of wood and mud. It didn't look like much, Aidan thinks to himself, but it's refuge from this bitter cold. His father uses the torch to light the hearth, which had been left unlit even on this chilly autumn night. The flames quickly lick up, freshly lit from the holy fire of the mound, and even Aidan breathes a small sigh of relief. The children lay their lanterns on window sills around the home. An air of tension pervaded the entire hut. Aidan could feel it. "Do you think they'll come?" whispers one of the children to the other. Aidan's father overhears them and responds, "I've never seen one, but you can feel them." His tone seems somewhat jovial, but there is uneasiness in his words. The family eats their meal, and as their bellies are filled and they are warmed by the heat of the hearth, some of the gloom of the ritual leaves them, and laughter fills the room, as tension gives way to the calmness of a family dinner. One like any other. Or was it? Aidan still has doubts. "What if a trickster comes in the night?" the youngest of the children suddenly asks. "What if it comes for us and takes us to the other world?" His tone is fearful. Aidan glances at his father, then turns to the boy. "Look at the fireplace," he beckons. "Don't you remember? This flame has been set alight by the bonfire, and so it is powerful and will protect us from harm. No demon would dare enter this place." His father nods at Aidan with a grateful look. "I've heard stories of them. There are monsters loose on this night. What if the fire calls to them?" the child retorts. "Now then, enough of that," Aidan's father remarks, a slight annoyance in his voice. He shoots a wry look at Aidan's mother as she rises, placing her comforting hands on the children as she gently shepherds them out of the room. "This is why we have called upon our loved ones this night," Aidan's father continues as the children shuffle off for bed. "Those who have passed on will also come to watch over us and help us through the coming months. I can feel them, as I said. Can you not?" The young ones suddenly seem satisfied, their father's calming words working their own magic, much like the incantations Aidan had heard the druids weaving earlier on the mound. A feeling of respite at last, though a small doubt still lurked deep in Aidan's stomach. With the children now tucked safely into bed, Aidan's parents also retire. Restless and unable to sleep, Aidan steps out into the dark of the night. He bends over and picks up one of the lanterns left on the stoop and walks out into the cold. He can see little with his meager light, and what he can see is obscured by his own breath, which snakes from his mouth and circles his head before dissipating into the cold air. He could not help but remember the tales he had heard about Samhain as a boy, stories shared by many far wiser and older than he. They had mentioned that whatever mysterious force stands between this world and the other world, the wall separating the two, was at its weakest on this very night of Samhain. The thinning of the veil, they call it. Remembering the old legends makes Aiden's heart suddenly beat faster. The children's stories are getting to me, he thinks as he walks down a path away from the house. He aimlessly kicks a rock as if to distract himself from the evening's proceedings. In the distance he hears a faint howling, and all around the thick, hanging fog seems to envelop him. The young man pauses, turns in one direction and then the other. His house is now gone from view. How far had he walked? He'd only been outside for a few moments. He was sure of it and quickly turned back again, squinting into the wall of mist, but to no avail. He'd lost track of the way he came. The wind was picking up, causing him to shudder, the remaining glow from his lantern now just barely lighting the ground in front of him. He hadn't thought to bring a cloak when he left the house. Leaves flitted along the ground past him, dancing in the crisp autumn breeze. "Get a hold of yourself," Aiden muttered as he plodded off determinedly into the fog. Suddenly, a ghastly vision stops him dead in his tracks. Before him, a pale white figure leading a withered horse, faint, barely visible, what little Aiden can see of the pair seemingly dissolving into thin air, then regaining its form like pulsating smoke. One moment there, the next gone. Aiden gasps. Spirits walking the mortal world. The beings appear to glide through the mist, slowly loping in his general direction. As they approach, Aiden is soon able to make out more of the figure. He seems to be an old shepherd, or rather, the remains of one. He bears a skeletal form, half of his skin hanging loose from his bones, and he is wrapped in a tattered shawl as he pushes himself forward on a long, gnarled wooden staff. Aiden drops his lantern and stumbles backwards, unable to run, but backing slowly away from the ghostly vision. The figure then suddenly pauses and turns towards Aiden. "God, has he seen me?" Aiden panics, but there would have been no use trying to get away, even if he had not been frozen in his tracks. An inhuman screech fills the air, and the haggard, unearthly shepherd raises his staff. He points it at Aiden, who is paralyzed with fear, seemingly rooted to the soil beneath him. The gruesome man and his lumbering old beast drift through the air directly at him, picking up speed, and Aiden screams as he feels coldness and darkness overtake him. The ominous night soon gives way to a bright, sunny autumn morning, and Aiden's mother is up early, as she always is, preparing breakfast. Her husband is snoring as she goes to wake Aiden. How long will that boy stay in bed? There are chores to be done. She enters Aiden's room and sees him lying there, swaddled in a blanket, seemingly in a deep sleep. Unable to rouse him with gentle nudges, she throws back the cover, yanking it from the bed, and mere seconds later screams in terror. Aiden's face is warped, twisted, panicked and disfigured, his eyes bulging and his mouth gaping in a silent scream. His hands are clutched near his chest, as if fending off some invisible attacker. Aiden is stone dead. The story you have just heard is but one way the mysterious happenings of Samhain could have possibly unfolded. The celebration of Samhain, the origin of what we know today as Halloween, has a tumultuous history. These days it may be known as a night of frolic and good fun, where children carve jack-o'-lanterns out of pumpkins, dress in costumes, and ask for treats from their neighbors. However, it was once a grim and foreboding night. The story of Halloween began some 2,000 years ago on the low plains and rocky coasts of Ireland. The people known as the Celts would have considered this a festive night, devoid of creepy ghouls and wicked witches. For them, November was known as Samhain, an Irish word meaning the end of summer. The eve before Samhain, Aicha Halna, when the earth is cross-quartered between an equinox, a day of equal light and dark, and the winter solstice, where the earth sees little of the warming sun, was revered by those who practiced what is now known as the pagan ways, as well as by those who still practice such beliefs. The Celtic druids or priests would perform rituals and divinations on this holiest of nights, readying themselves for the harsh, dark season to come. In preparation for Samhain, the Celts would take in their harvest, choose which animals to slaughter, and stock their stores as well as they could, so that it would last them through the winter. The harshness of the season could take a severe toll indeed, so preparing oneself for the cold months was of utmost importance. Samhain has been referred to as a liminal period, when the spirits of loved ones who have passed on to the other world can cross our paths once again, carrying with them foreboding omens. This thinned veil, however, could also allow the Esh-Shi, demons and deities of this supernatural realm, to invade our world, causing mischief and mayhem. A great many of the traditions we still practice today stem from rituals performed thousands of years ago. The act of pumpkin carving, which we covered in detail in a previous episode, The Legend of Stingy Jack, now generally a frivolous activity, would have once been performed in order to craft a talisman against the demons that walked among us on the night of Samhain. Root vegetables gathered from the crop, such as turnips or mangel-wurzels, would have been carved into lanterns, which the Celts would then carry with them through the evening, or place on window-sills and in doorways. Often they would be carved into gruesome faces to both brighten the dark of the night and ward off wayward spirits that might wander across from the parallel world. The act of dressing in costume also has its origins in the ancient myths of Eichahelna. Pretending to be a spirit of the dead or one of the Esh-Shi may have allowed a person to walk amongst those beings that have crossed the liminal plane without fear of arousing their ire and meeting a grisly end. It was also believed that the wandering souls required so-called propitiation, or in other words, the appeasing of spirits. Feasts would be prepared, and families would beckon their lost kin to return to them. People who engaged in such rituals hoped that the food and drink would satiate the Esh-Shi and garner their favor, so that the harvest might be bountiful and their livestock would survive the harsh winter ahead. With the cold season nearing, the Celtic people would look to their druids for guidance on what their future might bring. As the veil thinned on the night of Samhain, the druids would attempt to commune with those who had recently departed, or ask the old gods of the other world to show them what was to come. Massive bonfires would be built, both to ward off any evil presence as well as to symbolize the sun and its battle to fend off the winter's cold kiss of death. Then the druids would begin their scrying, attempting to glean anything they could from the other world. They would perform ritual sacrifices, both of animals and crops, casting them into the fire in order to appease the ancient deities and feed the flames' cleansing, protecting smoke. Men and women would lay stones around the base of these bonfires. If their stone was misplaced in the morning, it was an ill omen that they may not survive the winter. The crowd would then light their own flammable objects in order to carry the flame from the bonfire home with them for protection. Time, as it does with all things, has had a great effect on the rituals and customs that mark the night of Samhain. When the Romans came to Ireland, the land they called Hibernia, in the 1st century AD, they brought with them their own traditions. One such tradition was a feast celebrated around the 1st of November. It was a treatise to Pomona, the goddess of the harvest, for a fruitful abundance. The festival blended well with the pre-existing Celtic practices and brought with it new customs, like the eating of nuts and apples and the use of these foods in divination. Over the centuries, fear of the winter months diminished as technology advanced, and new means of staving off the cold emerged. Many of the rituals that once seemed essential for survival now became little more than games. The once solemn religious event had turned into one of celebration and jest. When Catholicism became the predominant religion of the Western world, it declared November the 1st All Hallows Day, a time to honor the many saints of Christianity, and so the evening before, the night of Samhain, would become known as All Hallows Eve, or as it is called today, Halloween. Going door to door and asking for food, a tradition known as mumming and guising, became a popular pastime during All Hallowtide, the Western Christian version of Samhain. Children and young people would dress in masks and costumes, knocking on neighbors' doors and asking for fruit or nuts in exchange for poems, jokes, or songs. Before long, those still celebrating the custom of All Hallows would find their way to North America through Irish settlers, and this is where the contemporary form of Halloween would take root. Over time, with an estimated 5 million Irish immigrants landing on the shores of the United States, their heritage remained. Designating one night a year for dressing up, dancing, and games was a great stress reliever, an annual feast that would allow for merrymaking and relaxation. Although Halloween is certainly more significant in the US and Canada, as well as in the countries of its origin, other traditions are celebrated around the world. Halloween has even spread as far as Japan, where cosplay or costume play is already prevalent. Thousands will gather in outdoor parties in the streets of many large Japanese cities, where people dress up in scary costumes to celebrate this night of masquerade and mischief. Eastern Europe has its own dark tales surrounding Halloween. In Romania, the holiday is heavily associated with their famous vampire legend, which hails all the way back to Prince Vlad Tepes, otherwise known as Vlad the Impaler, an infamous warlord whom we've covered in a previous episode entitled The Blood Drinkers. In Mexico, there is the Day of the Dead, a celebration that once took place in the summer and dates back to an ancient Aztec festival. However, with the Spanish Catholic colonization in the 16th century, it was merged with All Souls' Day, thus laying the groundwork for the spooky event that we celebrate in modern times. In North America, Halloween is also big business. In 2019, an estimated $3.2 billion was spent on costumes, $2.6 billion on candy, and $2.7 billion on decorations in the US alone. As such, it is now a commercial juggernaut where adults will dress up, attend parties, and gather in movie theaters to watch horror films for shocks and scares. Many of the old ways persist even today. We continue to carve jack-o'-lanterns, no longer protective amulets carved from turnips and other root vegetables, but decorations created out of pumpkins, heavily associated with the harvest in the West, to be placed on doorsteps in order to set the mood for the Halloween season. We dress up as ghouls and goblins, blissfully unaware of the risks of crossing over into the realm of the dead. Take care, lest you have a fateful encounter with sinister spirits who might be wandering amongst us on a cold autumn night, on Halloween, the night of Samhain. We would love to hear your own thoughts and ideas about the dark origins of Halloween and the ancient rituals of Samhain. If you have enjoyed this episode, please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Pixel Elixir, and on Instagram at Bite-Sized Frights. You can also subscribe at bitesizedfrights.com so that you never miss any of our terrifying tales. This has been a Pixel Elixir production, narrated by Chris K. Thank you for listening. Until the next bite, my friends.